Resilience professionals are experienced in juggling everything from supply chain disruptions to extreme weather events to the COVID-19 pandemic. But how does the Federal Reserve System do all that while ensuring the U.S. Central Bank continues to support our nation's economy? Today, we'll find out. Good afternoon. I'm Buffy Rojas Leach, Director of Communications for DRI International. Thanks for joining us for the latest in our webinar series, where we hear from experts in the field on how they navigate the current resilience landscape. Today, we're joined by several representatives of the U.S. Federal Reserve, including Jennifer Haberman, Manager in the Enterprise Risk Function at the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, Joanna Rothenberg, Senior Manager of the Federal Reserve System's Cash Product Office, and Jacob Hawley, Senior Manager of Business Continuity and Resilience with the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. Leading the discussion today is Bijan Karimi, Assistant Vice President of Business Continuity with the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. Bijan, welcome.
Welcome to Money Never Sleeps, Business Continuity at the Federal Reserve. I'm Bijan Karimi, the Assistant Vice President for Business Continuity at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, and your host for today's webinar. The Federal Reserve System has been hard at work ensuring that the U.S. Central Bank continues to support our nation's economy during a time of global supply chain disruptions, weather events, and economic stimulus payments, generating unprecedented demands for U.S. cash while adapting our own procedures to function in a pandemic environment. During today's discussion, I'm joined by a panel of business continuity professionals from the Federal Reserve Banks of Dallas, Minneapolis, and our Cash Product Office. Each of us is going to explain how the Fed structure allows for autonomous operations among the 12 regional banks while addressing local issues and ensuring that there's still a continuity of effort that has system-wide impacts. Let's start with a little introduction about the Federal Reserve System. The Fed performs 5 general functions. It conducts the nation's monetary policy. It promotes the stability of the financial system. It promotes the safety and soundness of individual financial institutions, fosters payments and settlement systems, and promotes consumer protection and community development. The 12 Federal Reserve Banks and their 24 branches are the operating arms of the Federal Reserve System, and each reserve bank operates within its own particular geographic area or district in the U.S. Each reserve bank gathers data and other information about the businesses and needs of local communities in the region, and that information is factored into some of the monetary policies that the Federal Open Market Committee and other decisions made by the Board of Governors. So in the context of business continuity, the individual districts coordinate with each other using a federated model, which is similar to the federal-state kind of government relationship. And the Board of Governors, they establish guidelines for the districts to follow. But the reserve banks take those guidelines and adjust them for the continuity conditions in their own districts. So business continuity policies are related, but they're not exactly the same across all the different districts. Now, there's a business continuity committee that facilitates the cooperation, coordination, and communication efforts across all the different districts, whether sharing best practices or perhaps it's information across the system when something occurs, like COVID, a hurricane, an ice storm, or something similar to that. Though there are some functions that cross all the different districts, like cash processing, and that's better managed by a single group. Think about it this way. Each of the districts are sort of functioning vertically, while our Cash Product Office is operating at a horizontal level across all the different districts. This structure is probably not unlike the ones that are used by other geographically dispersed organizations, perhaps even yours. And certainly there are benefits and challenges to this configuration. Today, you're going to hear from some of my peers as we talk about our concerns, how we organize and deal with issues, and some of the benefits that the federated model gives to us. I'll give you an overview of the 12th district and then have each of our panelists introduce themselves and kind of give a description of their function. So for us, San Francisco is the largest district, geographically and by the economy. We encompass the 9 western states, American Samoa, Guam, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas Islands. Our business continuity team is part of the district's police services group. We partner with line of business representatives, similar to departments, and work with them to train and prepare people, to develop different processes, and to maintain the technology and equipment they need to address disruptive events. One of the things that we've started is having kind of a kickoff meeting at the beginning of the year, where we identify what worked and didn't last year, what are some of the gaps that may exist, and how can we set up a process to tune those up through the course of exercises, training, and then ultimately update the plan at the end of the year. The federated model allows each of us to organize our business continuity teams and activities to address specific issues in our area. In the 12th district, we've partnered with our risk and audit functions so that we can work more closely with those individual lines of business and providing them kind of a more comprehensive look at the areas of exposure and what they can do about it. Then we serve business continuity as a partner with those lines of business, helping them to review all those different areas, what needs to be tuned up, and effectively provide them the subject matter expertise that they may not have themselves. Because we can't expect that they're going to appreciate the nuances that we as BC professionals have. And so we allow them to work with us and develop a really robust plan over the course of an entire year. And we work on this concept of providing guiding principles and then pushing decision-making down to the lowest level. So to do this, we create operational aids, and we encourage them to do it with the mindset of taking a capable, but maybe not very familiar person and help them make the best decision with, again, perhaps lousy information, all the while not falling prey to the curse of knowledge and making all kinds of assumptions, putting them in the plan because we have a better idea of what's actually taking place versus someone who's coming at this for the first time.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Haberman, the manager within our enterprise risk function here within the Federal Reserve 9th District. We focus on business continuity and crisis management. Our function has the responsibility for incident management, enterprise risk, and of course, business continuity and crisis management. The Minneapolis Federal Reserve serves 6 states of the Federal Reserve System: Michigan, Montana, North and South Dakota, and also 26 counties in northwestern Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We have one gorgeous location, branch in Helena, Montana. So if you are interested in learning more about the 9th District and the work we do here, I highly recommend visiting our public website, minneapolisfed.org, where you find a plethora of information about the work we do. And you can also view an amazing video called Traveling the 9th, which is a virtual tour series we created so you can access all those locations that I just referenced. Again, that's minneapolisfed.org. So within the enterprise risk group here at the Federal Reserve, we focus mainly on enterprise risk management, incident response, business continuity, and crisis management. And we work very closely with all levels of the organization to create an environment that supports continuity. And we have very intently built a culture of resiliency. So everyone in our organization, regardless of their role, understands what their response needs to be in a business disruption or a crisis. And that starts really with onboarding new employees from their first day on site, and is supported through the ongoing training and awareness for all employees, no matter what function they work in, whether it's a customer service representative, a bank examiner, or someone in our cash department. It is an ongoing endeavor that truly never stops, as we have to adapt to the ongoing challenges and changing world that we are living in, and all of the threats that are presented to us. So we are lucky, very lucky, to have support from our leadership teams who understand the importance of ongoing training and awareness and strategic planning. So we look at our risks that face our organization when we start planning for our year and our 3-year plan. We keep in mind those risks and those threats and do ongoing training and awareness to ensure that we are prepared to respond to such a broad range of possible events that could occur. For BC teams out there that are struggling with leadership support, it is extremely difficult, and it may be necessary to campaign your cause so that you can be successful. Part of our job at times is to push the envelope and make sure that we are allowing leadership to be aware of the threats that are present and that they have the information they need to make a decision to mitigate these risks. And then our job is to come in and focus on the actions we need to take in business continuity to prepare the organization in case those business disruptions do occur. So in summary, I think it's really important to build that continuity environment by having a support and common understanding of business continuity at all levels of the organization. So at the Federal Reserve, throughout the system, everyone has a role in resiliency and response, and we make sure they are aware of that.
Hello, I'm Joanna Rothenberg, Senior Manager of the Federal Reserve System's Cash Product Office. For the past few years, I've also had responsibility for the cash business resilience and enterprise risk management function. I'm very happy to be here. The Federal Reserve System's Cash Product Office, or CPO, provides strategic direction to the Federal Reserve System's cash services business by guiding policies and procedures, establishing budget guidance, providing support for Fed currency and coin inventory management, engaging customers and other key industry participants, and supporting cash services business continuity planning. The mission of Fed Cash Services is to supply currency and coin to meet both domestic and international demand, maintain the quality and integrity of currency and coin in circulation, and ensure that local financial institutions have ready access to the currency that the public needs. The CPO's primary goal in meeting our mission is to maintain confidence in the U.S. currency through well-controlled operations that meet the needs of the marketplace on a daily basis and in times of stress. To that end, CPO actively supports cash services business continuity planning and risk management. We work closely with all of our cash offices across the country to ensure cash services are maintained during any disruptions to the extent possible. These include standardized cash services business continuity plans for all offices, which are then aligned with any district-specific guidance or requirements. We regularly exercise our BC plans and available cash services tools such as buddy banks and the like. Given the pandemic, along with the multiple disruptions layered on top, we have invoked our various plans and playbooks for actual events, adapting and strengthening them along the way with every lesson learned.
Good start here. So my name is Jacob Hawley. I'm the Senior Continuity Manager for the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. And so within our district, we are the 11th of 12 districts within the Federal Reserve System. And primarily our area of coverage or responsibility is the full state of Texas, northern Louisiana, and southern New Mexico. Now within that geographic footprint, we have 4 offices, with our headquarters being in the city of Dallas. We have other offices in Houston, San Antonio, and El Paso. And so with that configuration, we have offices and representation in each of the 4 major financial centers of our district, which gives us a really good chance to understand the economic lay of the land, but also have the ability to affect change and bring benefits to our district as a whole, and also for the Federal Reserve System. And so because of our geographic location within the southern central United States, we have a great partnership and an engagement with our southern border there and our partners in Mexico, also heavily within the oil and gas sectors. But again, just like each of the different reserve banks, participate in a full monetary spectrum of the Federal Reserve System. And so with my team and my role within the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas as a continuity manager, we run the full spectrum of resiliency and continuity operations for our district to support not only the district itself, but the different offices as well as we go through the full effects management and resiliency program for our district. And so we built a team not only to work with the Dallas office as our headquarters location, but a very similar construct in each of our different offices to build that full spectrum of operations within our district. And also, and most importantly, especially in times like COVID-19, to work hand in glove with our Federal Reserve system partners across the different reserve banks. And so as we get into the business continuity discussion here, the areas of concern, as we've kind of seen over the last couple of years within business continuity and resiliency, is really that merging and that maturation of what the traditional business continuity space was, and that's the people, the places, the processes, the physical attributes that we can easily see and touch with business continuity. But now the merging, again, that maturity into the technology space, whether that's the traditional disaster recovery or the transition to cloud, and how we support those different businesses with their applications that are in that environment. And so while it's not necessarily a major concern, it's different. It's change. It's something we need to adapt to, not only from the business perspective and making sure they're ready, but also from the BC practitioners' perspective to make sure we have that proper skill set that we can bring to the table good ideas, positive solutions, and a very holistic understanding of what the business is, what they do, and what those potential gaps and shortfalls can be. So when we build that business continuity, that resiliency, that disaster recovery plan, it can take into account not only what it is today, but where we're going tomorrow, so we can be ready to respond to whatever that disruptive event occurs in the future. And so some of the things we focus on in the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas is somewhat of maybe a new concept within this space. Is we look heavily at what we call data viability. And so we consider data the fuel of technology, the fuel of that applications. And so while we always, of course, still look at applications and make sure they are resilient, they're redundant, of course, but we literally look more about the data, because the data is what supports those applications. That is what engages and leverages and makes those tools useful for the business area. And so we begin to explore and branch more into that technology space, because again, as we transition more and more to technology, we need to be more and more ready to adapt and be ready to support those businesses, especially within that technology front. And so the concern, again, is maybe less of a concern, but just an understanding of a potential gap that you might have there. Again, that's that skill set. So we want to be SMEs always in the traditional sense of business continuity resiliency. We want to be SMEs as well on the technology front. And so that gets us into new uncharted areas at times, but it's something we really want to look forward to and be proactive and be as educated and as willing and able to provide that consultative type service to our business areas, especially when it comes into technology, so we can support not only what we do at a local level, but what we do at a system level in the Federal Reserve with many of our partners that support the other reserve banks as well.
As you heard, one of the areas that we differ is where the business continuity function sits within our district. For me, it's within law enforcement. For others, it could be within IT or perhaps even the finance function. This, of course, has an influence on how we evaluate risk and what we think our primary concerns are. However, no matter where we sit, one of the big things that we all share is making sure to keep the interest of our executives in business continuity activities. And of course, everyone was super excited about business continuity specialists when COVID hit, but now as things have sort of started to trend down and normalize, business continuity is starting to move to the back of some people's minds. But that's where we're going to get the resources that we need as we go forward. In the financial system, we need deliberate, consensus-driven decisions based on good data that support the financial stability of our district. So it can be easy to think that by identifying key risks to our organization and creating mitigation plans, most issues can be addressed. However, what we have found is that that same type of decision-making, very methodical, isn't necessarily the one that is needed when it comes to a fast-moving event. And often, whatever we are faced with is nothing like what we actually planned for. And so responders need to make quick decisions, often with poor information, the opposite of the day-to-day environment we have. In San Francisco, I need people that are comfortable adapting existing plans to emerging or novel situations, or perhaps to concurrent events. As we saw with COVID, multiple things can be happening at the same time. We can't plan for all the different causes, but what we can do is focus on the consequence management that comes out of those issues?
So some of the areas of concern that I have related to business continuity now, I don't want to lose the momentum we have. I think in the past, we have had some organizations or other industries that we've partnered with, and we've heard that business continuity is an area that sometimes is easily overlooked. This is common, but I think right now we have an opportunity coming off of a global pandemic with intense natural disasters at the same time and community-related crises for most people to at least understand the concept of business continuity and why it is important. So if there was ever a time to reevaluate what is working, what is not working in business continuity at your organization, it is likely now. So making the case for a shift from BC working alone in a siloed approach to a more structured organizational resiliency model is something that you can bring to your management team. Focus on the risk-based approach to what's working and talk hand in hand and complement the other areas of resiliency at your organization, such as incident management, information technology, your physical security on site. So I think my main concern is more on a general scale of making good use of that opportunity. Additionally, a common concern I think we all have right now is related to supply chain concerns and how that may impact many organizations and many of us that are coming back to the office either this fall or early next year. We need to navigate through these back orders of what's sometimes very critical equipment for our organizations to run smoothly. And further, I think we need to look back and continue to build our ability to respond to those simultaneous events that we have seen. And we really saw this locally throughout the pandemic. We had some difficult times in our community after the murder of George Floyd. We had to respond to two extreme events at once. And we have planned and trained and exercised for two large scale events. But when you have a pandemic and chaos in your community at once, it becomes more real. And we had to really put our plans into action at the same time while focusing on each other and asking, are we all doing okay? This is something that you can't plan for, but having those logistical and tactical plans in place made it much easier for us to respond at the time of.
Apart from our own FedCash operations, we're also concerned with the cash services supply chain. That would include our industry partners with armor carriers, financial institutions, as well as our treasury partners with the Bureau of Engraving and Printing and the U.S. Mint. Cash services supply chain is currently facing challenges with staffing, raw materials, and transportation. In addition, with the coin circulation challenges we're currently experiencing, the CPO convened the U.S. Coin Task Force to address some of those issues. And more information about that work may be found at their website at getcoinmoving.org. Internally at the Fed, CPO has made and continues to make technology investments for standardized automation of cash processes, coupled with the appropriate business procedures, strengthens our operational resiliency. In addition, CPO regularly leads meetings with cash office leadership and BC coordinators to ensure operational readiness for any potential BC event. CPO is also in regular conversations with our treasury partners regarding currency and coin production and managing inventories. Our industry partners play an integral part in the cash services supply chain. The Cash Advisory Council, or CAC, is comprised of the largest national financial institutions and armor carriers. Since the start of the pandemic, CPO has facilitated regular meetings with the broader CAC to discuss cash challenges and to share information. In 2019, CPO and the CAC's Business Resilience Subcommittee jointly developed the Cash Resiliency Playbook. The playbook describes how the Fed, armor carriers, and financial institutions would work together during a BC event. Most recently, for example, during Hurricane Ida's landfall on the Gulf Coast in August, the playbook was invoked, and CPO stood up an industry call at 1 p.m. local time to share operational status of the Fed, the armor carriers, and the financial institutions that were impacted in the region. After the event, a joint industry after action review was developed to note improvement opportunities that may be included in the future iterations of the playbook. The Business Resilience Subcommittee continues to meet regularly with the express purpose of fostering greater cash services resiliency by sharing best practices, lessons learned, and strengthening our industry relationships.
From a concern side, it's just the new world that we're in, as many businesses are experiencing the COVID-19 situation, pushed most of us away from the office into a hybrid or a full-on telework environment. And now we've, like most businesses, have been very successful in this environment that we're in now. But as we slowly transition back to a hybrid solution, bringing more and more people back to the office, the situation is different. We have never really done this before in any kind of grand scale. And so, while not necessarily worried about what we want to do here, we need to just understand that this is a different situation. So we need to ensure that our plans, our continuity strategies, the people that we have in charge of our continuity strategies understand the dynamic of what this new situation is, and then build our plans accordingly to understand this is our new reality. And so we need to have our plans be reactive, flexible, but still able to meet the challenges of the growing dynamic that we're in from this current state. And so within this environment, we've tried to build a continuity structure that, again, can be very adaptive to this situation, knowing that there are more things that we just simply don't know. The world is more dynamic, but all those common disruptions, all those common interruptions are still there. We still have the hurricanes, the earthquakes, tornadoes, civil unrest, cyber outages, whatever it is, those problems are still there. Now just the environment has changed around them. And so what we've done in our district is built a structure from the bottom up that also works very well with our Federal Reserve System partners and our different reserve banks. And so we built a system where it's a crisis and an incident management structure that is able to manage the local events with local leadership in a great way that gives them the power, the flexibility, autonomy, and decision-making process so they can make those decisions and respond effectively when it is a local event, because much like an emergency management field, locals manage local events the best. And so we built that structure in a very similar mantra here within the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. And so when it gets into a larger crisis situation where the district is getting involved, we have multiple offices coming on board to deal with the same situation, much like we experienced in the winter storms in Texas earlier part of this year. Every one of our offices was engaged in a very similar response structure, and our crisis management platform and our management structure was able to come in and successfully manage that event and do it very effectively. And so when we have that crisis management structure, we're able to parse that information, parse that collaboration and communication with our Federal Reserve System partners when we have an even larger event, much like the hurricanes we experienced on the Texas and East Coast, and then of course the COVID-19 situation, where we can effectively come together, collaborate, communicate, and execute those decisions in a very efficient manner. And so, again, when we do that, training is always part of what we need to do with our business continuity space. And so we recognize that the leadership of our organization, they're not doing crisis management. Our business leaders aren't doing crisis incident management, nor should they. They have a business to run, an organization to operate. So when we do our training, our exercises, our cultures, our fundamentals, we try to keep it as simplistic as possible, but make sure we reinforce the foundational natures of what we want to do with our program. And so we develop things such as quick reference guides and documentation that we can use from a training aid, but also in a live event to help guide our leadership through the initial crisis management process. And so much of that entails, what do you do first? What do you second? A checklist of who to call, make sure you're engaging certain replications, making sure you're engaging the right folks. And then it helps us guide us through that process, because we know when we have a crisis or an incident, the first hours, the first number of days, those are critical for the success of coming through a crisis successfully, and being able to do that early is very important. And so one of the other special areas that we've built this environment on within the Dallas space is the convergence of business continuity into the resiliency space. And so what that means and how we've applied that is we understand that traditional business continuity and disaster recovery still is there. We still need those facets. But as we move more into that technology space, we're looking to bring in our partners that help support us, and we support them. So what that looks like is a more reliance, more engagement, and more cooperative nature with our InfoSec, information technology, strategic risk, HR, IT, those support organizations, we bring them more into a fold and more into a similar package. And so when we go to business areas and say, hey, we need to increase our resiliency, because you are a critical function for the organization, it's not just a business continuity professional bringing ideas, it's those subject matter experts around the different infrastructure components of the organization that could explain to them from their perspective the need to be resilient and how to do so in the most cost-effective and inintrusive manner as possible. And so we think we're really going down an interesting space of merging the best parts of business continuity in a traditional sense, but also leveraging the key components of resiliency going forward. And I think it's really starting to pay off for us as a district. And just lastly, we build our training and our exercise program to be hand in glove with our leadership, as I mentioned before. And so when we build these exercise and training, we work from the full spectrum of what we need to do in response to a crisis. So it's not just leading the executives in the crisis management response, it's working with the analysts, the managers, the supervisors within each of these different departments. And so they can be as effective as possible through the full spectrum of that operation. And so that comes in from how do you do the communications? How do you send situational reports? What goes into those communications? And how do we do that? So when we train and we exercise that full spectrum of operations, when we have to execute it, when we have a COVID-19, when we have a massive winter storm for multiple days within our district, our people are ready, they're prepared, and they can respond effectively when we have that disruption. And at the end of the day, it keeps the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas out of the news, which is a good thing, but it keeps our operations 100% functional without any disruption. And that's ultimately the most vital component that the Federal Reserve System and our district can bring to our economic system for the states.
The federated organizational structure has both benefits and challenges. Organizations are going in the similar direction, all of us together with some of that guidance from the Board of Governors, but we're still functioning independently. In San Francisco, the best practices from other districts, we incorporate those into what we're doing. That's great. And we mostly do the same thing, but that variability provides kind of this opportunity to test out different things, see what our partners are doing. Maybe they're doing it a better way. And because others deal with regular events like hurricanes, we can learn from them. We face primarily, earthquakes is one of our biggest issues. That's not something that happens all the time. So how can we learn from our partners about what works for them when different events come up? So some of the challenges working in the federated model are certainly some of the inefficiencies and the ease that we can fall into some of the siloed thinking. One of the areas where this plays in particular is deciding on technology. And the differences in our processes, which are needed because of local operations, also make it difficult sometimes to have one codified system, which of course is one of the benefits of an economies of scale. So while we can agree on consistent practices and benchmarks, we all are still customizing our environment. And so we should ultimately track back to similar activities. But sometimes there's still that difference between it's not a perfect exact thing, because plans are not exactly the things that you're going to execute on when you're faced with a particular situation. Sometimes systems can be too rigorous. Some of the systemization that we may do is going to focus on the gathering, the analyzing, and the dissemination of intelligence and what's going on across the district. Now, there are times where cross-district work groups are requesting the same information. COVID is an example of that. And because we are still tuning up some of our coordination activities in different emergencies, sometimes we're requesting duplicate information. That's one of the downsides to working in the federated model.
Some of the benefits of working at the Federal Reserve with the structure that we have, it allows us to continually be checking in on each other and learning from each other. Ultimately, we're all working towards the overarching same mission of the Federal Reserve System. And so, for example, with cash and currency, we need to work together to ensure we are meeting the needs and demands of the market every day, especially during times of crisis and stress, which we've all experienced lately. So business continuity professionals know you need a backup, but our structure and our ability to have our geographic locations allows us to have a multi-layered backup support function. So we're able to maintain that confidence in an extremely critical aspect of our national economy. So when it comes down to it, it is really critical that we are working under a centralized model to support the critical operations, such as cash. Some of the challenges in working in this type of a structure, I think just like any other organization on a national or global scale, the environment in which you reside has an impact on how you operate. So there are times when we need to learn from each other and adapt. We find ourselves trending to maybe a more comfortable siloed approach, but we have to pivot back and reconnect. It is extremely helpful to have partners on all sides of the nation to call on and compare notes and offer support and sometimes ask for help. But at times it has been more difficult during COVID with less face-to-face interactions and much more virtual work or virtual meetings. But we've been agile and we have adjusted well. After all, that is what resiliency is all about. If your first plan doesn't work, you need to go to plan B.
Some of the benefits of working in the federated model would include common standard tools that are available for use with the associated support and maintenance. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time there's an issue. And there's folks out there with some experience, and so we're able to jointly tackle issues together. Some of the challenges of working in the federated model are that one size may not fit all. There may be unique challenges in specific districts or regions or business lines in this case. Adapting to change or addressing emerging risks may take greater time as we need to move together as a system.
And so one of the interesting parts about the Federal Reserve System is our federated model. And so the common understanding, I believe, is that the Federal Reserve System, the Federal Reserve banks, they're just one big entity, and they're not. And so each of the different reserve banks, and there's 12 of them, they're independent entities that fall under the Federal Reserve System umbrella with our board of governors. And so what that means is that you have essentially 12 different organizations with 12 different independent structures all going in the same direction, but still individual organizations in themselves. And so I kind of think of the model is much like the United States government, how it's set up to give you a representative, maybe a look into it. So at the federal level, you have that board of governors, the Federal Reserve System, that's providing that strategic oversight, providing that strategic direction of where the Federal Reserve System is trying to go. At the state level, you have the different reserve banks, the 12 different reserve banks. And so within that state structure, they're all going essentially in the same direction, but how they conduct operations, how they set up their individual organizational structures, the different businesses that are not one-to-one across the reserve banks, the structure is a little bit different, but it gives them the autonomy to set up their business, to set up their operations the best way they think possible. And then once you get into the local level, which we say is our district offices, those are those local organizations. They're the boots on the ground. They're the folks that are engaging with the community, engaging directly with the business areas that we're supporting. And so when you put all those three organizations together, you have that Federal Reserve System. And what's important about that is each of those different components of the organization need to be able to cooperate, communicate, coordinate, and decide and command effectively when we have a crisis response. And so I think the Federal Reserve System has done a great job in doing that. It's just something we must continue to evolve, but it gives you a good sense of where the organizational structure lies. And so one of the key components, I think is actually a very good part of that federated model, is it gives the individual reserve bank, especially within the business continuity resiliency area, the freedom to explore, to experiment, and then to set up the structure that works best for them. And so now we have our 12 different reserve banks, how they're constructed, where the business continuity professional and the organization sits within those organizations quite varies across the board, but that's okay. I think that's actually a strength. So it brings in that diversity of organization, diversity of perspectives. And again, it lets these different reserve banks practice, try different organizational structures, and then bring those positives to the overall and say, hey, this is a good idea. Maybe we'll have some replication of some different reserve banks. So that laboratory innovation, it does get promoted by the Federal Reserve System and the federated model. And then also, I think one of the key points to kind of go to our previous point is just that marketplace of ideas. And so what that means is those 12 different reserve banks, they're all trying to be resilient. They're all trying to have a good continuity disaster recovery program. Of course, we're all going in the same direction. We're all trying to do great things. But when we come together in that federated model, because we are independent to a great degree, we always want to bring our good ideas to the table. And so it's just, instead of just having one person decide this is the direction we're going, we have 12 folks that sit around essentially at a committee table, say, what is the best idea? What are the potential pitfalls and other people's strategies, and hash those out and come to a good realization that there are good solutions. And so we get to cherry pick or pick and choose the best parts of many different solutions that we can employ across our different reserve banks. And then again, if people do experiment and something doesn't work quite so well, it's okay. We have partners at each level that help support us and get us on the right track. So end of the day, that federated model, while a little bit complex from an org chart perspective, it does breed the best idea, although not maybe the quickest, the best idea usually comes forward. And I think it's a great attribute of what we built within the Federal Reserve System. But then again, what are the downfalls, or what are the less than optimal parts of that Federal Reserve System? That's to be debatable for sure, but I think it's one of those things that obviously stands out. It's just, it is a little inefficient. And so again, we have one person in charge to make a decision. It could be good, it could be bad, but you make a quick decision, you go forward. Within our federated model, it's harder to make those quick, deliberate decisions because we have 12 different individual organizations coming together and trying to find that solution. So while again, it might not be the first decision, I think it is that best decision ultimately when it comes forward. And then going through the experience of COVID-19 with the pandemic, I think we've had multiple iterations in 18, 20 months to actually put that practice into place. And so what has been interesting about that specific event and why this federated model works so well for us, because we're such a large company, or a country, excuse me. And then when we have to respond to something like a pandemic, which is ebbing and flowing across different parts of the world, different parts of the organization, different parts of the country, we're able to leverage and support each other across the Federal Reserve System. So when a different reserve bank is having to deal with COVID on a massive scale, it's very intensive area, perhaps it's not so much in a different reserve bank, and so we can help each other out and balance and load share some of the work that goes forward there. Excuse me. And so again, I think another challenge within the Federal Reserve System model is that there is some duplication of effort. And so, as I mentioned before, we're all going the same direction. We're all trying to achieve simply the same goal. And now we have 12 different organizations simply trying to solve that same question. So at times, there is some duplication of effort, but I think that's actually okay in the long run, because it does demonstrate and show you that, hey, if 2 or 3 reserve banks are similarly coming to the same solution, the same practice, there's probably more validity into that solution. And so that gives you some onus to go to the larger organization. Hey, I think we have something here. Maybe this is the model, because multiple people are seeing the same thing from a different perspective. That often gives you a good sense of this probably is the right decision, or there are good components of that decision to go through. But one part that is somewhat more of a struggle when we come to these different situations for our federated model is that in a crisis situation, I think most people can respect that crises don't respect boundaries. And so the prime example of this is when we have a hurricane type situation that, in our case, affects the Texas coast, going to our Houston, our San Antonio office. We in the Federal Reserve System, in our bank, we're the primary responder because we own that geographic footprint. We own the business operations and most of the people in the path of that storm. So we do the preparation and response to that storm. But then more often than not, these hurricanes will go into Louisiana, the Gulf Coast, or they'll go up on the eastern seaboard. And when that happens, that goes across different reserve bank boundaries. And so when those occur, we are having to simply hand off a lot of our operations, our control to different organizations, which can be a good thing. But whenever there's a handoff, an exchange of information, an exchange of roles and responsibility, there's always a risk of some things falling through the cracks. And so we've known that for many years. And I think we've done an amazing job of enhancing our operations, enhancing our collaboration, our communication aspects to minimize that. But there's always that risk in doing that situation. So even in the pandemic, that's affected multiple reserve banks and simply the Federal Reserve as a whole. throughout most of the last year and a half, we've had to manage those situations, understand that, sometimes boundaries on the map are not the only thing that matter. It's the ultimate goal of what we're trying to solve. And so not a large problem, but something we're always cognizant of as we learn to build out our crisis management team. And then lastly, I think one of the opportunities that we need to go through with the Federal Reserve System is when we're trying to develop and build in technology. There's 12 people at the table essentially. And so there's 12 different perspectives, opinions, and priorities that come on to play. When we want to have a technology or build a capability set or build a taxonomy, we need to come together and find out what the best solution, do the pro and con, do the analysis of what's best. And again, there's different perspectives on what's most important, but that's okay. But going through that process does take some time, some deliberation, some negotiation. But again, at the end of the day, we come out to a very good solution. It's just not the most immediacy, in getting to that solution. But ultimately, it does come out to be a very effective end. And so, just in conclusion, I think one of the great things we do here at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas and with our system itself is have that commitment to resiliency, have that commitment to continuity, and that pervasive nature from our top of our executive chain down to our business continuity teams is breeding a sense that we are somewhat risk averse, and the businesses know that, but that's part of our mantra at the Federal Reserve System. And so we build our processes, we build our structure in place to minimize that disruption. And as we go into I call the resiliency frontier, understanding where we're going, the technology enhancements going to the cloud, those type measures, we need to consider to factor that in, and we're doing that actively. And so we continue to be ready, not only today for whatever the crisis that might come up today or tomorrow, but we look a year, 5 years in the future of what that environment might look like. We can be ready as a business continuity organization, and ultimately we can make our business and our organization ready and able to respond and minimize that disruption as much as possible as we go forward in the future. So it's going to be a fun ride as we go forward with that. We're going to explore. We're going to have some pitfalls, but we're going to have some amazing victories as well. And so we really look forward from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas of finding those new solutions and working with our partners in the Federal Reserve System to ultimately find the best solution as we go forward, as we develop our crisis management framework, our business continuity planning, and overall our resiliency for our organization.
Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, Money Never Sleeps, Business Continuity at the Federal Reserve. I hope hearing about the ways that your Federal Reserve System coordinates to keep essential functions up and running helps you think creatively about your own operations and identify areas for improvement.
Thanks once again to our speakers for sharing their experiences. Before we wrap up today, I'd like to remind all of our listeners that registration is open for DRI 2022, our 10th conference designed for business continuity and resilience professionals. We recognize how important the return to in-person networking and exchange of ideas is for sharing information that will help us face the future. There is also symmetry in DRI holding the first post-pandemic live conference of professionals in our field. DRI 2020 in Savannah was the last in-person conference for our field before the switch to virtual events. So it's only fitting that DRI bring professionals together again to discuss the issues that matter most. We'll be returning to the Planet Hollywood Resort and Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada, February 13th through 16th, 2022. And you can take advantage of early registration rates now through November 30th by using the code on your screen when you sign up. We can't wait to see you there. If you have questions that we didn't cover today, give us a call at 866-542-3744. A recording of this and all of our other webinars is posted on drii.org. This webinar has been a production of DRI International 2021, all rights reserved. Thank you for your attention.